Welcome everybody to the American Space Museum. I'm Mark Marquette and we're glad you're here to help you stay curious. You see we have a guest with us today. Say a good welcome to Dan McKune. Dan was a crane operator at the Vehicle Assembly Building for more than a decade, and he had a lot of other jobs in the mechanical fix-it world over at the Kennedy Space Center during the shuttle era. So Dan, we welcome you.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here. Dan is also our facilities manager here at the American Space Museum. And when we always see Dan, we have things like, Dan, here, this broke on the engines out front there. Fix
Yes, it
it.
did.
Okay.
I got to fix another one.
In fact, how I met Dan was I'm a volunteer here about a week, and he's the first guy to call me. And you think he'd say, welcome aboard? No, he said, are you in good health? Because we got a lot of stuff we got to move from our storage space to another. Meet us Saturday at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was when I first met you, Dan, was we moved stuff like we have too many times from the free storage places we have to sometimes they say we can't allow you to be there anymore. We're tearing the building down. And Dan's been involved with this museum a long while, and he's an indispensable asset to keeping the roof from leaking and our AC working and all that stuff. We do thank you for that, Dan.
Yep.
But first, before we get started, just wanted to say welcome everybody to Stay Curious. Marty Winkle, of course, is our cameraman and co-producer on the other side of the camera. Thursday, we're going to have Dr. Gary Stutty here, and he is a NASA gardener. He's a biochemist, of course, but he is one of the biology people that have worked 20 years to get astronauts to eat food on the International Space Station, and they're finally doing it. And I'm going to ask Gary about the miniature plums that he's been trying to pioneer. Good fiber, good source of all kinds of things, plums. That's been one of his things. But we did want to mention today in space history, September 15th. You know me, I'm always loving our shuttle astronauts. We've got 7 space shuttles in orbit on this day in space history. I went through them yesterday, and I'm going to talk about them more tomorrow. We also have 2 Gemini astronauts. Gemini 11 was landing today in 1966. You throw 3 Skylab astronauts from the second crewed mission on Skylab in space in 1973, I'm sorry. We had 7 International Space Station people in 2006 on this date up there. And 2 cosmonauts were launched today, Dan, on this September 15th in space history. That puts 53 human beings that can say, I was in space on September 15th. And that is 10% of the 525 people who've been to space. Think about that. Those of you stargazers out there, this is the last good week to look at the Milky Way as the moon is going from crescent to new phase. So if you're camping out this weekend, good opportunity to take some long exposure photos of 30 seconds or so at a very high ISO like 2000 to see the Milky Way before it starts setting. And you're all noticing it's getting dark earlier. Astronomers like me love that because now you can see Jupiter directly south and Saturn's to its left, 2 of the brightest stars in the sky. Check them out with your telescopes. Mars rises around 11 o'clock at night in the east. It'll be the brightest red star you'll ever see here in about a month when it's more into our evening sky. So that's what's happening up in the sky. Once again, I welcome our friend and a great guy with some great stories, Dan McKune. Dan, tell us a little about where you grew up, and he's been a gearhead with 2 wheels for a long time. Tell us a little about your growing up.
I grew up in a small town in western New Jersey, just a couple of miles north of Oradell, New Jersey, where Raleigh Sherrar grew up, and we were both born in the same hospital.
Is that right?
Decades apart.
Decades apart, yes. Wally Sherrar. Well, you're being, he loves automotive and all that sort of thing, and I like hanging out with guys like that. You were into motocross at one point of your life, and now you're just into enduro
Yep.
2-wheelers.
Yeah, I used to up around the upstate New York, Pennsylvania, and New England area, race motocross and scrambles, and gave it up for a long period of time and came down here, and it kind of rekindled
Yeah.
the desire.
Now, Dan, were you in those ice?
I did ice
You
race.
did ice with the spikes on the tires?
We didn't use spikes. We
Oh.
just used sheet metal screws.
Oh, wow.
Well,
Okay.
not the well. The pointy part would screw in. The heads of the screw was enough to give you traction on the ice.
Oh, okay.
When I lived in Monroe, New York, it was like a lake region, and in the wintertime, you do what you can do. In the
Yeah, winter sport,
in the
yeah.
summertime, they were out there on water skis, and in the wintertime, we're out there on the motorcycles.
So I asked Dan about that. He's got a natural sense of mechanical stuff. I love talking to him about Mr. Fix-It stuff that we do around here. But tell us how you got involved in working at the largest single-story building in the world, the Vehicle Assembly Building.
Well, I worked in a machine tool company up in Middletown, New York, and they sent me down to Kennedy Space Center to do some work on some equipment. And about the third or fourth time I was there, where I was checking out, and they handed me some more paperwork. They said, "We need this paperwork filled out." And I thought it was a little odd. It wasn't like the other times I was there, and I looked at it, it was a job application.
Oh.
So it was an open invitation to do something I was really very enthusiastic to be a part of the space program and to be in Florida for scuba diving. So I mean, they didn't have to twist my arm very hard.
Very good. And the rest is history, as they say down here. You had a great career and did some interesting things, and we're going to talk about that. That was was that right in the middle of the Apollo era?
No, I wish I could have been part of that.
Oh, okay.
That was in '83,
All right.
and just after a couple of launches of the shuttle, the first shuttle launch I saw down here was STS-7. That was on one of my job assignments, and then I was working there for STS-8, which was the first night launch.
Right. Well, that's cool. And yeah, that was a great launch, I'll bet. Well, we're going to talk about some of his memories of what Dan ended up doing that I always brag about him, is he picked up the shuttle orbiter and made it to the stack, they called it, the external tank, and the two solid rocket boosters that are behind him there. And I told Dan he can use a pointer and wheel around there. Wanted to point out it is a pandemic, and we do have a COVID-safe barrier there. I don't think that COVID can get through there. And we certainly thank Coastal Window and Tint and Clay Locke for donating this to our nonprofit. We can't get enough help from our local people here in Titusville, and Clay Locke and his company, Coastal Window and Tinting, and here in town, gave us this when we approached them to order one. And it's a good way to be safe. I'll segue a minute from talking to Dan that we are opening up Monday. Call for your appointment, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 2 o'clock. And if you book the 2 o'clock appointment Monday through Friday, you'll get to meet Marty behind the camera there. And maybe me, okay? But more importantly, we'll probably corral you to be part of our program and give your impression of our museum, because we can't wait for you to see it. Dan, you've been such an important part of it. Back when this COVID was starting in March and April, one of the first things you did was bring a carpet cleaning equipment in here and really buffed up our floors, and been doing a lot of that stuff, haven't we, in the last 6 months?
They had plenty of time to clean up.
Plenty of time to clean up.
Try to catch up.
We've been tacking the outside with several of our volunteers are outside working in the hot humidity, getting the place spruced up, and we'll show you some pictures of that that I've taken on Facebook of what we've been doing around here. So we can't thank our volunteers enough. We're getting excited, getting ready. In fact, I've not been able to post much on Facebook because I've been doing some docent training of some new docents that'll be here to help you out. So hope you missed some of my 3 or 4 posts a day on Facebook. We'll put a few more on there before the day's out, including some about the GT-11 landing. But the man of the hour here is Dan McKune. Marty, I did want to talk a little bit about the Vehicle Assembly Building. For those of you who don't know, here on the Space Coast, it's like, I call it like our Devil's Tower. Okay, because I love looking in. When I go away from the Space Coast, the first thing I want to see is look over my shoulder and see that giant building over there on Merritt Island. It is the largest single-story building in the world. It's actually the 5th largest building in the world as far as volume. Believe it or not, the Boeing plant in Everett, Washington, the Boeing aircraft plant has 2 of the top 5 largest buildings, including the largest. And then there's a big Airbus A380, the world's largest airliner, where it's built in France, is the second largest building. Boeing's is almost twice number 2, 470 million cubic feet versus 200 in France. There's a thing in Germany that was building airplanes that they turned into in the Tropical Islands Resort, and that's 180 million cubic feet volume. And then there is a dock in Germany that builds boats. It's 160. But the VAB and another Boeing building are both about 130 million square feet volume, cubic feet volume, 1.2 million square feet on the floor. So it is huge, as Marty's showing you here in this picture. That was an early picture of it. Largest doors in the world, 45 minutes to open the 457-foot doors. To lift components of the shuttle, the VAB had 5 overhead cranes that Dan's going to talk about, including two that had a capacity to lift 325 tons. And Wikipedia said 136 other lifting devices that I'm sure you played with about every one of them, Dan. One interesting thing that we noticed on the beautiful VAB here, and here's a bicentennial era of it, special picture because they've got a replica of the Saturn V in front of it, is the American flag, the largest American flag in the world, 209 feet by 110 feet. The blue field where the stars is the size of a regular basketball court, and the stars are 6 feet across. And they had the meatball, the bicentennial star logo was there, of course, during our nation's 200th anniversary in 1976. And the meatball has been permanent there since 1998. And it just went over kind of a revamp, didn't it, Dan?
Just recently they repainted the flag again. And I would imagine the meatball got the same treatment. I used to work with some of the guys that were in the paint shop that did that work. And to see them hanging over the side on scaffolding, doing that work, is pretty amazing.
They didn't do it with a brush with like little happy stars, did they?
No.
No. It's probably a spray it on, right?
Most of it was all rolled.
Rolled on, yeah. Huh? Yeah. Not sprayed, okay. Yeah, that's pretty high up there.
They'd have to basically close down the area for parking if they were going to spray it.
And you've seen the VAB in many movies like Marooned, Apollo 13, Contact. In the year 2000, it was put on the National Registry of Historic Places. So I kept looking to how much it cost to build it. That was kind of an evasive number to have as a taxpayer to find out what it cost to build this. In March 1962, Rocco Petrone, the NASA manager over the whole Kennedy Space, over the launch pads, estimated the VAB would cost $130 million in 1962 money. All right, $130 million. So that's an easy $1.3 billion today to build it. It was actually built to house 4 Saturn V rockets at the same time. We thought we'd be building those things and going to the moon pretty regular. And it didn't quite work out that way. At no time did they have more than 2 in there, I'm sure. And then it was converted to use the shuttle. And that's where we bring Dan into the story here. Dan McKune, tell us a little bit about your knowledge of the Space Shuttle and when you came on board in 1986. What was...
When I joined the crane crew in '86, it was a little bit of a departure from what I was used to because I was in a shop that repaired all the launch damage to the mobile launcher and to the launch pad. But when I came back in, we were brought into the crane crew. Being in the crane crew, there was a fairly large group to begin with, and they needed more people, so they got the abundance of people back there from the layoff. They needed the people to start this aggressive effort to get back into space. So we had probably close to 20 new hires just in the large group that it was to begin with, and which immediately started a massive training that they've never encountered before. So we spent weeks after weeks after weeks going over all the OMIs, all the maintenance procedures, getting first hands-on on how these cranes operated. And many of us, we'd been out there before working in other departments, but now we're finding ourselves 465 feet up in the air with controls trying to figure out which way to go. And it was a very strong experience, listening to one guy down on the floor guiding you, and regardless of what you can see out the windows, you have to trust that guy, the ground controller, to tell you where to go. It might look different to you, but you got to trust him. At the same time, there's somebody sitting next to you, and he operates the bridge and the trolley. He goes east, west, north, south. All you do is talk on the radio and operate the hoist up and down. On critical lifts, which is a booster, external tank, or the shuttle, you got a third man up on top on the trolley watching the level wind. If you're familiar with a fishing reel and you're reeling in a fish, you've got a little piece that goes back and forth and lays the fishing line nice and easy so it doesn't get all bird caged. Well, there's one of those up on top of that crane. And you got to watch those things. And it's two of them to watch back and forth like this. Wow. And as soon as one of those things stops working, you got to call an all stop. And at any moment in time during an operation, anybody can call an all stop. Of course, you can always start again. Mm-hmm. But you call an all stop, there's no questions asked, you just stop. Clear the problem, proceed on.
Mm-hmm. I brought some pictures, Dan. It's probably if I slide those over to you and Marty can zoom in and you can explain a little bit about what they're looking at. First, I have been fortunate to just be in that building one time, and it is pretty mind-blowing how big it is. Dan will tell you some nuances about it, like does it create its own weather, Dan?
It will hold its own weather. If the doors are open and some weather moves in. See, when you're stacking, they have to have the doors open in a configuration called a chimney effect. Uh-huh. In one high bay, the lower door, the horizontal doors will be open. And then on the opposite side of the VAB, on the west side, you'll open the top. So if something would happen, air could come in and go out the top. Mm-hmm. That was something they practiced from the beginning. They didn't have to do that with the Saturn because the Saturn was loaded without any fuel. But as soon as they started dealing with solid rocket motors, right, that was a whole nother story.
Yes, the two solid rocket motors, the white rockets on the side, are nothing more than pop bottle rockets. They're stuffed with high-tech gunpowder. And so once they bring those in, it's probably a different level of awareness, huh?
Everybody, when you're handling those, it's called open grain. You have to wear the flame retardant coveralls, which you'll see everybody running around there with white coveralls on. The neat thing about this picture, though, it does show everything in the crane crew, because the crane crew is the cranes, doors, and platforms. It shows the door open here in the background. It shows the platforms, and it shows the shuttle, which we assembled piece by piece. Each booster is made up of 4 segments. Each segment weighs 180 tons. And it's set up in the crane so you know how much you're picking up, because when you have 180 amps on the amp gauge, that's telling you you've got the full load. It's somehow or other they figured it out that way.
Huh.
The amps
equal the tonnage,
yep,
huh?
Yep.
Well, that's kind of an easy way to read it then.
When they're opening the doors, it requires somebody going all the way up to the top, hit the panels. There's no remote control, where you can just go over here and hit a button and open the doors. You got to go up to the top and open the doors.
Dan, explain a little bit. Not everybody knows everything about the space program, of course. Explain the 3 parts of the shuttle and how you put them together, and in what sequence did you put them in?
Well, the amazing part about it is how it's all stacked. When they first start stacking the boosters in the high bay, there are engineers in the LCC watching their monitors, and they can tell exactly how that booster is setting on the hold down post, because around the base of the hold down post there are strain gauges. These hold down posts are massive. They're at least, I would say, 8 to 9 inches thick. And yet when you put 180 tons on it, and 180 tons and 180 tons, and keep building it up, they can tell exactly which way it's leaning. And it has to lean a certain way for them to stack it properly. Because when they have the external tank, when they go to put the external tank in place, they actually have a very crude method. They have come-alongs way up at the top of the boosters, and they stretch them out. Then the external tank can come down in between them. Then they let the boosters come back in so they can mate them.
Wow.
But everything has to be stacked in a certain way, because when they hang the shuttle on it, the shuttle makes everything hang back the other way. Because the shuttle weighs, somewhere over 100 tons, 110,
Right.
120 tons, depending on the payload. So it's interesting because the place I worked before I came into cranes, we used to refurbish those hold-down posts and put the strain gauges on them. And that's how I learned about that. One of the most amazing things about the crane crew, it allows you to really appreciate all what the space program was with the shuttle. You can take a raw diamond and you have something pretty impressive. But the diamond doesn't become anything until the facets are cut into it. And all the different departments, all the different groups and contractors that work together, all have a facet in that gem. So when it's all done, there's your gem.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it.
And it's the best way I can describe it, because it's so many things working together to make it work.
Well, that is, look at the next picture here, and you can comment, because I got 4 pictures here to kind of give the dimensions, the size of this thing. And there's one, there you see the external tank there.
With the bipod.
And you have this in its...
Orbiter is being lowered down in between the platforms, and it's a very slow, tedious. And when you're in the crane and you're doing that, you're down here watching it, and you just see the shuttle coming down slow, 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 slow. But up in the crane, you pick up the oscillations of those ropes, the wire ropes going off the drum, and you'll be sitting in the cab, and you can actually feel the crane oscillating a little bit.
Huh. Sitting in a cabin 400 feet up.
Yep.
Suspended over the floor, right?
Yep. And you've got windows based on either side, so you can look down and see exactly what you're doing. And it's fun. It's really, when they bring the external tank in, that's the wild part when they do the external tank, because the crane has got limits. You've got lower limits and you've got upper limits.
There's a cool. Yeah, go ahead.
To get the external tank into place, you have to bring the external tank all the way up till it hits the limit. But that's not enough room.
Huh.
You've got to go about another 1.5 feet. So then there's a procedure you do. It's called floating. You can go past it by using the amperage. The cranes are working off of these things called motor generators. And you can increase the amperage a little bit so you can be past the first limit up to the final limit. And then you know you have enough room to get over. And for the crane operator, he can look across to the beam on the other side of the railing that the crane is on, and he can see the delta marks. You've got delta marks for the boosters, and you've got delta marks for the external tank, and you've got delta mark for the shuttle.
Literally marks that you spray painted or something.
Yeah, they painted them on the rail on the other side. So all you had to do is get to that point, and you were probably within maybe about 1 foot of where you needed to be to come down. And then they'd fine-tune you as you brought it down.
Huh. Look at that picture. I chose that one because it really shows you how high above the ET and the SRBs you are there.
Well, the neat picture about this picture here is that you notice that the shuttle is turned at about 45 degrees.
Yes, yes.
They had to do that to get it in between the towers. Because when they built the vehicle assembly building, you're lifting a cylinder up and going over and down. Didn't have any wings. Well, shuttles got wings, and the only way they could fit it through the doorway is to turn it sideways. And to do that, once you have the shuttle hanging upright like that, the crane operator looks down and he can see the vertical stabilizer on the shuttle. And he can also see a mark on the floor at 45 degrees. So the ground controller will tell the crane operator, go ahead and swivel to your mark.
Wow.
And at that point, the crane operator will hit the swivel it to the mark, stop it, and then you're good to go up and over.
Now, is it true, Dan, that you could set a crane on top of an egg? Is how gently you
Oh, yeah.
could do this?
At one point, they used to, part of the proficiency test, they would set a spray paint can aiming at the ground controller.
Oh,
And he had to bring the crane down to just touch the tip. Somebody saw that and they thought it wasn't a good idea, so they changed that. And what we changed it to is we taped the broomstick to the hook, and we had to write our name with a magic marker on a piece of paper on the floor by just telling the crane operator to move 3 inches to the north.
you put your name on there, and how big would that be? Like,
We had a piece of paper on the floor about this big.
and you maneuver
So
the.
the crane operator could not see it because the block is, I can climb inside
Uh-huh.
the block that holds the hook.
Wow.
That's how big it is. So the ground controller, he's the only one that can see what's being done. And he tells the guy to go 3 inches this way, 3 inches that way, and you write your name.
Oh, wow.
And you do a good job, you
That'd
get
be
to keep the
interesting to
paper.
see. That's cool. That's interesting. Well, so that is a true statement there. This is a way cool picture. There's your levels up there. Explain, you're way high up there.
Yes.
There's the nose of the orbiter. We
Right.
don't know which one is right there.
Right? That is the nose of the orbiter, and it gives you an idea. These are the platforms I was telling you about, and these all lift up out of the way when they want to roll it out or before.
Oh, okay. They're on hinges, so
They're on hinges, but that's part of the.
That's part of you lifting those up.
All those lifting devices you were talking about.
Uh-huh.
Okay, each platform has got probably about 3 to 4 hoists on it. Each one of those has to have the PMs done on them, and all these and then the platforms themselves, they're on rails. They roll back and forth. That all has to be made, complete maintenance records on all that stuff. So it'd be neat to see a sped up video of what goes on with the platforms and the stacking and the manpower it takes to put one of these things together.
Wow.
It would really be mind-boggling.
How about fighting the elements, Dan? You got salt water constantly, salt air. I mean, is constantly is something. Was that a maintenance issue?
Most of the stuff up there was painted with a paint called an inorganic zinc. And it's very. That's what the whole launch pad was painted with, and it's very durable. You do have some corrosion. And just even just on the sides of the doors on the outside, you've got the aluminum panels that are held in with carbon screws. And from time to time, we had to go up there and replace all those because they were flapping in the breeze. So it's a high maintenance item, but you know.
Now Dan's wearing a T-shirt there proudly. He would say this acronym around me, the LES. He would tell me, the Launch Equipment Shop.
Right.
And tell us a little bit about that famous kind of underrated building.
It's one of the oldest buildings out there right now. This building was there when they were building the VA vehicle assembly building. You can see behind me, it's on the camera, but there's a spherical bearing here. That's what the actual booster sits on. And originally, those were made in the LES shop and later handed out to contractors. Once it was. The LES was almost like a prototype shop to make stuff, and then those are made out of Inconel. They take days to machine. That's why they went out to outside contractors, because the LES had to do so many other items out there. We also, like I said earlier, we did the certification of the hold-down posts to make sure that they were in shape to be used. There was also an item called the blast shield, which protects the hold-down post from the rocket blast of the booster. And these are little platforms actually slam shut as the booster leaves. They have to slam shut within 0.9 milliseconds of the shuttle clearing them. Basically, they rest on the aft skirt of the booster, and when the shuttle clears it, it slams shut, and it protects that spherical bearing. Because when the shuttle would leave, it always left toward the door. It just kind of walk a little bit to the north.
It didn't shoot straight up. It was shoot out a little bit
Yep.
away from.
And so the hold down posts, the 4 hold down posts that were to the north would get toasted.
Wow.
And that's how they were refurbished in our shop. We actually had a launch simulator in my barn out there, and that's how we validated the blast shields. Each one had to be tested 4 times, and they had to be all within the specs of 0.9 milliseconds. And then they'd go out and then they'd be able to mount them on the MLP, one of the last things that they put on before it goes out the door.
Mobile launch, the MLP, mobile launch platform. And we've got a replica of the crawler behind us. The mobile launch platform is what the crawler lifts up, right? To take
Right.
it out and set it down on the pad. Just so many little pieces, parts, everything involved in this thing.
Well,
like
they're
you said.
repurposed. Those
Yeah.
mobile launchers were repurposed. Those were all used, those used to be called LUTs. Those were called the Launch Umbilical Tower
Oh, gotcha.
for the Saturn.
Yes.
And they sat in the, on that big picture you had, you could see in the background that there was a mobile launch
3 of them standing there on this.
over
big-
on the side over here. You'll
Yeah.
see that there's a
Yeah.
LUT sitting there. And when I hired in '83, there was still one alive back there.
Huh.
Not that they were going to use it, they just haven't repurposed it yet. And they're repurposing them now. That one company that was going to use one of them recently, they were going to stack in High Bay 2. Recently, they lost the contract for the military payloads, and so that's on hold now. But they were going to reuse one of the mobile launches again.
Well, and what the VAB is being used today is for the Space Launch System,
Right.
and it had to reconfigure some things in there on your levels, I guess.
All new.
All new. Go back to the no winged aircraft, but now cylinders in there. We talking to our NASA friends, contractors out there. We all know it's a very stressful, intense job all the time, but y'all are also known for blowing off steam in fun ways. So tell us some of the fun times out there. What kind of shenanigans might go on out there with you?
Well, before I get to the
guys?
shenanigans, some of the most
Nothing
impressive
gets you in
things
trouble, Dan, but you're
I
retired.
had, it's really memorable because being in the VAB during, if there was a launch, you had a lot of people wandering through the vehicle assembly building, and everybody's looking up, seeing if they can see the ceiling. And back in the day, you could actually look up and see the white beam that was the last beam placed up there that every contractor got to put their name on. But everybody's looking up to see how far they can see. And a couple of times I saw an astronaut walking around. She was looking up, looking up, looking up. I said, would you like to go up there and look down? She goes, oh yeah, I'd love to. Her name was Mae Jameson.
Okay.
So I brought her up, and we go up through the elevators. You go up to one elevator to, I think it's, the last elevator you go on, I think you get off at the 36th floor. I got my cheat notes here. Yeah, you get off to the 34th floor. Then you get into the little small elevator, and then you get off on the 36th floor. And then you go up a catwalk. Back then it was a catwalk to go up to the crane. And you walk down the catwalk to the spiral staircase, I'm sorry, to the crane. And then you walk down there, and I'm walking down there with her, and I happen to think, maybe I should turn around and see how she's doing. And she had a white knuckle grip on both handrails. And there's only one handrail up there. The one on her right was the 480 volt. It was an insulator.
Yeah.
Okay, so but it's still not the best place to hold on to.
Right,
Especially when
right.
you hold on to something metal on the other side. Anyway, so I just had to turn around and tell her, trust me, please, just for a second, go like this. She did that. And I said, no, again, no, go, use your left hand on the handrail. And I said, now take a look at what you're holding on to. She nearly passed out. But then she confided in me. Now, this is how dedicated these people are. She's a scientist. She wants to do her thing in space. Then she confided in me. She was terrified of heights. And she was up there 465 feet up.
Yeah, you're talking about Mae Jameson, the first African-American woman in
Yes.
space. Dan, she was in space on this date in space history in 1991 or 92, I think, maybe 93.
And it seems like almost all the astronauts I met, they seem to have, they must have gone to some sort of class for, no, as far as being really open and trusting and everything, because I mean, they remember names, they remember everything. And all of them, I took Sam Geemer up there with his wife, their daughter, and their neighbors to show, and he got a thrill because he got to take pictures. I took him out onto the crane because it was parked right over his vehicle. He was slated for the next shot on, I believe it was Atlantis. And he got down there and he was able to take pictures of his own pictures, not pictures that NASA gave him, his own pictures of his vehicle waiting to get launched. So that's stuff like that that really made, you know, your job feel like you're really part of the whole program. You know, shenanigans, okay, yeah, you get bored up in the crane because there's a lot of times you're sitting there, it's called one up, one down. You have a booster sitting on the ropes and they're waiting on paperwork. So you one up, one down means one guy in the crane, one guy sitting down on the floor with a stop button in case something happens. And meanwhile, everybody's twiddling their thumbs, reading books or whatever. Well, start ripping pages out of the book and you're making paper airplanes.
Paper airplanes.
And the whole idea is to see how long, what the longest duration flight could be.
Yeah.
So, little things like that.
I've heard people say you could throw a paper airplane out one door and it'd circle around and maybe come in the other door.
Mine almost did that. Mine went out of the door and turned around and came right back in with the draft. But yeah, no, it's like you said, when you open up those doors and that vehicle assembly building is so massive, it takes up so much area. On a calm day, there's a breeze blowing through there.
Wow.
It's bad because when you go through the small doors through the VAB to the outside, there's a lot of dust. And you open up that door and it's a dust storm. For a while there, you had to wear safety glasses to go in through there.
Well, that's interesting. Hadn't thought about that, but
Back up to the cranes, there was a guy, he slipped and fell climbing down into the crane. And I can't remember if he broke his hip or his femur. And the fire department had to go up and rescue him. And if you remember, I mentioned something about a spiral staircase. The guy had to be carried out on one of those mesh leaders.
Oh, really?
And there's no way of doing that in a spiral staircase. Because this is not a big, elegant spiral staircase. This spiral staircase might be about this wide.
Right.
And they had to strap him in and brought him down onto another platform head first because they didn't want his weight to be on his leg. And then they were able to take him to the elevator and out. And it took probably maybe 15, 20 years for them to take those spiral staircases out and put the conventional staircase with landings to the crane.
What kind of stories do you remember most about picking up these orbiters? 5 orbiters, of course, and 3 of them are in the museums.
Well, when you go to pick one up, there's 2 ways. When I first started there, we'd pick them up off the ground. They'd roll them over on their wheels. We'd pick them up. And then the landing gear doesn't have the hydraulics to retract. It's not like an airliner that can pull up its landing gear.
Right.
So the landing gear has to be the hydraulics that is used to pick them up. They're they weren't very efficient. And so a lot of times, and the doors too, the doors had to be pushed up. They looked like big brooms.
Broom handles, huh?
And they had, like the big wide brooms you use for big wide floors in stores and like for dust. And they'd have to close the doors with those.
Wow.
And I mean, you'd watch them trying to use the hydraulics to lift up the landing gear, and they come up a few feet, cup up, and all of a sudden just drop. And it was tedious to watch. Then they got the orbiter transport vehicle, and they'd bring it in underneath the orbiter in the OPF. The orbiter sitting on jack stands. Drive this in underneath it, lift it up, take it out, and bring it over to the VAB, and then you lift it up off of that. But the most memorable one, when I forget which orbit it was, we're lifting it up, and they got the command to go to bring it up to the vertical position. And when it got to be about almost 45 degrees, you heard stuff sliding around, hitting stuff, banging. Apparently somebody left some tools, a toolbox or something like that up inside the orbiter
Oh, wow.
in the cargo bay area or
Wow.
in the engine area in the back. I never found out where, but everybody's just looking at one another. Should we keep going? Should we keep going? Yeah, keep going. Keep going. And when the noise stopped, it was still stilling. And by the time they got it up, over, and mated, that's when they found out what it was. But we never found out what it was.
Now, was it noisy? I mean, these are diesel engines, source. I mean, is it noisy in there when you're working, lifting around, or
The
no?
only time you get noise in there is like when they fire up the crawlers. They fire up the crawlers because
Okay.
the big diesel engines in the crawler are started with air motors. They sound like the biggest impact gun you ever heard, and they start those up. The newer crawler motors that we put in for the AC electric, they have a conventional electric starter. But when those diesels fire up, even though we put bigger mufflers on them, a bigger noise canceling system, they still make a lot of noise. Every now and then you get venting. And they make announcements that there's going to be venting. So.
Were lasers a big part of this to align things?
When the crawler comes in, they use laser alignment. They have targets on the structure, so the crawler comes in and keeps it right on the mark. Same thing when they get out to the pad. They get out to the pad, they have laser alignment system. Now it's not automatic. I mean, the operator, the engineer driving the crawler has got to move it back and forth to keep it right.
Well, so interesting and fascinating, the 30-year legacy of our shuttle. We're going to celebrate the 40th anniversary of STS-1 this April. And here's a man who was a part of it, literally lifted up all the orbiters, mated them to you were involved in over 100 missions probably, huh?
No,
Yeah, maybe more like 70.
because I was there in the crawler group, in the cranes. I was with them from 86 through 94, and
Okay.
so I was involved with all those. And that's not like when you can be in that position I told you before, one up, one down, during a launch. They don't stop operations in a VAB because there's a launch.
Right.
They're still stacking. So you could be sitting up there in the crane during a launch, and that's when you really get a ride.
So were you? Tell us about 3.5 miles away from the launch pad
and you're
in the
sitting
VAB.
in that,
What's that like?
You're sitting there in that cab, and you're bouncing up and down with the sound of the shuttle going off. And the doors are closed, so you couldn't see it. So you just could hear it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They don't say, time out, everybody, let's go watch the launch?
Not those guys. No, not the people involved. Like I said, during a launch, some people, just like the people in the LCC, they're still heads down on their desk taking care of business up to the very last. That's why when Challenger blew up, so many people didn't know what happened. They were just looking at the telemetry in front of them. They were looking at all the pressure gauge, everything going on, and it wasn't until everything really came to a screeching halt that people started looking up and realizing what happened. But those wheels keep on turning during a launch, and you have people up in the crane. You have people,
Interesting.
Yep.
Interesting. And what's it like on the roof?
bright,
Bright.
very bright.
That's
That's the first experience you get when you go up there, because we had to go up and take a long time ago. They had a little hoist out in front of at the top of High Bay 1 that would take the lightning mass off of the hammerhead crane before the launch umbilical tower went in for stacking. And that's all it was out there for. And they found that it was a source of corrosion. So somebody said, let's get rid of it. So, okay, we went out there and we started unbolting all this stuff. And we went home, came back out the next day, because we're working on platforms. These little things called pick boards were out there working. And we got, back then, we only had safety belts. We didn't have the harnesses, just the safety belt. And you had your lanyards. So we're not going to carry these things up and down every single day, so we just left them in a pile. Well, we came up there the next day to work, and the buzzards had been picking through, not the belt, the buzzards were picking through the lanyards It was almost as if they would say, we're going to kill something. We got to eat.
Wow.
It was like, if one of these guys falls, we're getting dinner.
Wow.
But we were up there for about a week taking that thing down, and he finally took it away with a helicopter.
Huh. Oh, wow. That's interesting. You mentioned the Challenger disaster, and of course you were around for the Columbia disaster, and you can't emphasize what a sad day that was and so forth, but we pressed on. But tell everyone what's on the 16th floor of the VAB.
On the 16th floor, there's a couple of things. One, get back to the stacking bit a little bit. When they brought this new test article in for the SLS, that is the longest piece of equipment they've ever rotated into a mate position. And on the 16th floor, there's a part called the diaphragm. And that's a walkway. And I was surprised that that article made it across that they didn't have to modify it. But on the 16th floor over in High Bay, in Tower B, I believe it is, that's where the remains of Columbia. And the big, out in front of that, there's a big, just like the launch sticker for Columbia. The thing is about 8 feet tall.
Oh.
And my crew and I, we had to hang that up in front of there for a special dedication. And it was really cold that morning. We had to go steal a High Ranger from the RPSF where they were doing the booster rotations because somebody forgot to get one for us. So in like 30-degree weather, 3 o'clock in the morning, we're hijacking one to put that emblem up on the side of the. And I believe it's all open for tours for special groups to go up and see what was recovered from Columbia. There's nothing on display for Challenger.
Yes, Challenger they put in a rocket silo out on Cape Canaveral, correct?
Right.
And sad ending to a wonderful chapter of American space program, but what a fitting tribute to the lives lost that the vehicle is in the
And also
High
proved
Bay
that it's
there.
still a learning process. We're still learning today what's going on out there, and how things react to long-term, just like the LDEF, the long duration test facility. When they brought that back, that was brought up by Challenger. It was supposed to be brought back by Challenger, but it stayed up there for 3 years, I think it was.
Yes, a satellite that they had all kinds of paint materials on it to see how long it would last. About a year in space, but ended up there 3 years.
Yeah, and I was happened to be on the crew that took it out of the cargo bay.
Oh.
So I got an up-close look to see all the little micro impact points on it. Really impressive looking.
Wow, and that had been in one of the orbital processing facilities.
Yep, right.
The 3 garages around the VAB.
Right.
That you also worked at. Well, fascinating stuff from Dan McKune. We appreciate you, Dan, being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Is there something you'd like to share that we haven't asked you about?
Well, other than it's what I was able to explain about my analogy of the whole program being a gem, and hopefully it's going to be that way again.
Yeah, and you were just one little part of one facet of that diamond in there, Dan.
Yes.
But yes, we know it takes everybody to do their job to put humans in space and bring them back alive. So
the other thing is that everybody's kind of getting down on why is it taking so long? Why is it taking so long? And they don't remember back when they made the transition from the last Saturn mission to the shuttle mission. There was a long time there, and people basically were wondering, what are we doing? What are we doing? And they just got to remember that it takes time.
Takes time, and we've had this delay because of the COVID pandemic. 6 months has whacked everybody out. So we will persevere, and we're so appreciative to Dan McKune to share his stories about being a crane operator in the Vehicle Assembly Building at Kennedy Space Center. Dan, we really appreciate you and all that you do here at our museum. We got any questions out there, Marty? I'd say hello to Robert Law. Robert Law, I shipped your package to you yesterday. Robert bought some things on our eBay, American Space Museum, as our eBay presence, and I shipped him off to Scotland yesterday, his Transportation System number 5 pack of stuff, space flown coin and so forth. So you'll be getting that soon, Robert, and we appreciate everyone who supports our nonprofit museum, either by donating these Benjamins to us, all right, or any way else you support us. And starting next week, you can come and visit us by appointment, limited 10 visitors at the hour of 10 o'clock, noon, and 2 o'clock. And like I said, if you book the 2 o'clock, you'll get to see us do Stay Curious and maybe be on our show. So really appreciate our guests like Dan. This is what our museum's all about, the American space worker, and he's one of the finest. Another one, Marty Winkle, behind the camera, helping us bring to you another program of Stay Curious. I'm Mark Marquette, and tomorrow we'll have some more topics of space history when we bridge the space between us.